Hi everybody, hope you're all well. It's Steve as usual, in my favourite spot at the workshop bench, just with one of the drawings from the Pathfinder build. Just got the rig drawing out because I'm tinkering with a few things, with the one thing that I'm working on out here, which is the gaff, yard, jaws and the metal work. So hopefully show you that in a few weeks time. What I'm doing out here today though is it's just setting up to do some of the voiceover work for the video which you're now watching, hopefully. And the idea of this is to try and do a year 1 and year 2 video blog about the build of the boat. And rather than me sitting here being a talking head and just being completely boring, what I'm going to do is mainly show some of the, I think, nearly 3,000 photographs, but like in sequence and in sections, because they show far more about the build than I can really ever say. And then what I'll do is I'll come and do voiceovers where it needs it, just to explain what's going on in various sections. So hopefully this is the last you'll see of me until right at the end of the video. And in this video what I'm going to do is talk about year 1, and that is why build a boat, and why I built this boat at this time as a response to things that are going on in the world when I started, which is the COVID problem. The story of the build goes back to 2019. In 2019 I stopped work. I did my last shift at the hospital, and it was almost quite funny. It wasn't exactly a case of dropping my scrubs on the floor and running out of the door naked, but it was pretty close. Looking back, the funny thing is that within 24 hours of leaving the hospital, I was aboard my boat in the Tamar River, and that was at the time my little 22-foot cat-ketch centreboarder. And that afternoon headed down the river, a cold evening, and anchored, and then headed out to sea. I spent a few days just sorting the boat out because I hadn't sailed for a few months, and then 3 or 4 days into the voyage, I left Foy very early one morning, just as it was getting light, and headed out across the English Channel. For those that don't know, the southwest coast of England and the north coast of France, Foy is about 110 miles from iv'e, which is the place I was heading towards, which is the northwestern tip of Brittany. The English Channel typically gave me a good kicking, wind against tide, big tides, quite a bit of wind, and yeah, that was a hard voyage. But it got me to France. So I spent a day or so recovering in iv'e, and then went up to Paladin Quay, went shopping in France for the first time, and then I spent 110 days cruising in western and then southern Brittany. Quite early on in that set of voyages, I explored a whole load of areas I'd never been to in France before. So, for example, I went into the Rade de Brest and up the Aune, all the way up to Port Launay and Châtelaine. This has become one of my sort of favourite places in this part of the world. And then I went down through the difficult Ras de Seine and around to Audierne, and then further along on that coast around to Lesquenil and Benardet. I didn't get to the place I wanted to, which was further along that coast, but 110 days sailing and living aboard a little boat was a huge amount of fun, and probably the best sailing I've ever had in my life. And of course my partner came out when she could, and I think we had a really good time that year. So that was 2019. 2020 everything changed. The boat was in the yard. I was ready to launch it. was literally on the yard trolley, ready to go, and I was going to go off sailing again. We knew about this problem in China, and I thought, well, maybe I won't get to France this year, but I'll start the voyage that I promised to start many years ago, which was to sail around England, just going into all the small places. And I thought, that'll be fine. And then literally 2 days before my boat was due to go in the water, got a call from the yard to say, yard shut, we're all locked down, if you want anything off your boat, take it off your boat, but you can't access your boat anymore. So in the space of 2 days we were locked down and locked out. Thinking back to 2019, it was typified by this thing that a lot of sailors talk about, which is sailing as the last freedom. It seems to be the last thing you can do, where you can just have a small boat and be in charge, and with your food and your water and your fuel, enough of it, you can almost go anywhere, you can almost do anything. And that's how it was in 2019 for me, in that I set up for several cruises of 10 days at a time, being completely independent on the boat, and I had a really, really good time doing that. And then to contrast that with 2020, it seemed the exact opposite, in that I went from freedom to a total state of rules, compliance, and anti-freedom. Another huge contrast between 2019 and 2020 is that the 2019 is a year. I mean, that's the year I retired. I stopped working in the NHS, and literally overnight jumped aboard the boat and went off to sea. So I went from very organised, structured life to my own very organised, structured life of sailing and cruising around Brittany, and again making my own decisions. And in 2020, it's like that's the year the retirement kind of really happened, in that I simply didn't have anything to do. Like many people, it seemed that the rules were you can go out once a day, you can have one set of exercise, you can only go to the supermarket when you have to, you can only do this when, you can only do that when. It seemed like a year of total rules. And the weird thing was that what we found was that where rules didn't exist, people were making them up. Example, I like to go walking. I live in a great area for that, and in those days I tried to go out every day, and there was quite a lot of talk about walking on the internet, because this was a new idea. Hey, get some exercise, go out for a walk. But there was this sudden strange impulse to create this new rule, which is, yes, you can go for a walk, but you can only go for a walk for an hour. That's all you're allowed to do. And when we pushed back against this on the internet, people say, no, it's a rule, it's definitely a rule, I've read it somewhere. And of course it wasn't. But people seem to have got it into their minds that rules was the zeitgeist of 2020, and it was very, very strange. I find it hard now to remember much about 2020, what I did. I remember I sat outside a lot. I sat outside on the garden bench, just kind of watching the world go by. Went out for walks. I spent far too long in front of the internet, and I don't remember much of what I saw. What I did do is kind of come up with a set of rules for the end of that year and for 2021, and that's something I called the COVID Coda, and I've never really written about it properly, but it was an idea that I was going to have to create a set of rules for myself to live by, kind of in isolation at home, because I spend long time at home alone. And a lot of that was this idea that I needed to have something that had both physical and mental engagement, and with which I would have to really learn something and really make an effort at something. And that's really where the idea of building a boat came from, because I've never built a boat, and I had really nothing in the way of practical skills to bring to that. And the other thing I wanted to say about 2020 is that, and I have been asked, is that what we thought might happen in the NHS with nurses, doctors and whatever, is we might start suddenly losing them because of illness. As it happens, it never happened. But one thing that I did quite early on is that I rejoined the clinical register, or the emergency register, and I was even recruited. Got phoned one day, and the recruiting agency said, "Okay, what can you do? Are you prepared to go and work, for example, in one of the Nightingale hospitals, that was London or Exeter?" And I said, "Yep, fine, I can do that." And really, what I can do is things like intensive care. I thought, well, that might be useful because intensive care got talked about a lot, or specialist respiratory care. Yeah, I can do that. Things like blood gases and so on and so forth. I can do all of that. And I was expecting to be, redeployed, as it were, and it never happened. And so I think that a lot of 2020, I was kind of sitting around waiting for that to happen, and it just didn't happen. I think what we rapidly were starting to learn in 2020 is that COVID was a real disease. It was making people poorly, but the survival rate was incredibly high. It was nothing like the thing that we'd been presented with, and so the fear that was being pushed on the public by the government, by media, and especially social media, was way over what it actually was. But end result, still had to find this way of living at home, and engaging and creating and learning. And so really that's where the desire and the eventual decision came, just to fulfill all of that by building a boat. In the autumn of winter of 2020 going into 2021, I did a lot of research about boats, and that was a lot of the internet time. I think I may have explained before, but it's just worth saying again. I really came down to two designers. One of those was John Welsford, who's in New Zealand, and I really liked 3, even 4 of his boats, and I just kept going round and round those 4 boats, and they were, from the smallest, there was Scamp at 11 feet, which lots of people build and have a really good time with. There was Navigator at 14 feet, and my local friend, that's Steve Park with Arwen, he's built one and he sells his, has a lot of fun with his, and that was really tempting to do a Navigator. But then there were also the 2 longer designs. That was Walkabout, which was a rowing and sailing kind of expedition boat. And I know one of those had done the Everglades Challenge. I thought, yeah, that's really interesting, that boat. And then John had done this kind of updated version, which was called Long Steps, which was again an expedition rowing and sailing boat. Now they really appealed to me because that was the kind of thing I wanted to do in the future. But there was this one idea that kept coming back, and that was to have the kind of maximum size boat that I could have at home here, which was around about a 17 or 18 foot boat. So in the end, I settled on building Pathfinder, which would be quite a big project and a very expensive project, but it was the one that I eventually went to do. So in 2021 I started work, and the 2 first things I had to do was build a shelter outside, because it was going to have to be built outside the workshop. The workshop is way too small for a boat that size, and set the workshop up and get materials. And so I think it was something like May of that year before I actually put tools to wood and actually started making parts of the boat. And I worked on it pretty consistently that year, worked right through until the autumn. I think I eventually packed up at the end of October. By then it was cold and wet. It was difficult then to do things with epoxy, but by the end of 2021, I ended up with the complete shell hull of the Pathfinder, and I was kind of it was quite an amazing year. I was really pleased to get that far with it. So, in brief, that's how it came about, and that's what I ended up with.